washing the entire body, we meant that flowing water must reach every limb of the body, and we discussed the minimal case of how this will take place. Then we went on to discuss the sunnahs of taking the ghusl, and that consisted of a sunnah wudu as well. And we discovered some hikmas, some wisdoms that the hadith presents us with in terms of what we found in the narration of the Prophet ﷺ's bathing, and we drew comparison between that and our own lives. Now we will go on to discuss what breaks the wudu. But before that, there was some of the brothers were inquiring around the khuf. There were some other inquiries as well. MashaAllah. But we said that you have to get that information in Kitab al-Nikah, right? So some of the brothers, MashaAllah, they really wanted to know, to what extent can we enjoy ourselves. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give complete enjoyment, inshallah, in this life and the next, within Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's laws. Now, so the khuf. So I won't go into much detail regarding the khuf. The khuf as we know it, I don't know if the khuf is translated as the leather sock. I think conventionally we know the khuf to be the leather sock, right? So in principle, the khuf is the leather sock, right? Let us agree on that understanding of the khuf as a basis and discuss the idea of the khuf and some of the rulings around it further, because this would be a discussion that forms part of wudu, right? So you would be happy to know that in terms of the hadith literature around the khuf, then many scholars are cited to say that the ahadith around the khuf collectively constitute like tawatur. And I don't know if Mullah Zakaria, in terms of his like giving us an appreciation of the hadith, mentioned tawatur. So he mentioned the different levels of authenticity of a hadith. And in our understanding, in terms of solitary narrations, meaning ahadith that are not narrated in the quantity that Quran is narrated, meaning the amount of people that narrate the hadith would not be the same amount that narrate the Quran, right? So those ahadith, in terms of the authenticity, when we look at number, they would start at Sahih. At Sahih. And these are some of your hadith in Bukhari and Muslim and some other books, Ibn Khuzaymah. There's many books, not only the Sihah Sitta. There's a whole lot of literature that produce Sahih ahadith. We do have the notion that only Bukhari and Muslim, or the Sihah Sitta, for those of us who have a more, like a greater appreciation of hadith, the 6 authentic books. In fact, there's no such thing as the Sihah Sitta. Right? It's just the Sahihain. The other 4, anyways, that's another discussion. But it's not to say they're not Sahih, and the authentic narration is not restricted to Bukhari and Muslim. Right? You could find an authentic narration in Ibn Kathir. You can find it in Al-Durul al-Manthur. Any book could hold an authentic narration as such. However, the point is, the hadith around the khuf are beyond this level of authenticity. The concept that gives the Quran its authenticity in terms of number is called tawatur. So the ahadith around the khuf reach the level of tawatur. Meaning that you don't even have to look at the sanad of a single hadith, because there are so many reports about the Prophet ﷺ legitimizing the usage of the khuf that it's basically beyond doubt, um, as would be a single verse in the Quran. All right, so the khuf is a well established rukhsa, dispensation, or leeway that is given to us by the law, and I think that's important to understand. So it says, ويجوز في الوضوء للمقيم يوما وليلة. To use the khuf is permissible to complete one's wudu for the person who's a resident, meaning they're not on travel, for one day, 24 hours, a day and a night, right? 24 hours. So this is the person who is not on travel. The person who is on travel, when we're talking about the khuf over here, would be the person who's traveling for, like, the numbers differ. Let us call it 83 kilometers and more, right? They're traveling this amount. Where exactly when can a person start using the khuf and all of that? That has its own discussion in terms of travel. Over here, we're just talking about the khuf. So if the person is on travel, they can use if the person is not on travel, meaning they're at home, they can use it for 24 hours, right? وللمسافر ثلاثة بلياليها من الحدث بعد لبس. And for the person who's traveling, 3 days and nights. So that would be 72 hours بعد لبس, right? من الحدث بعد لبس. Meaning that, when does this 24 hours start? Do you have 24 hours when you put the khuf on? Or do you have 24 hours when your wudu breaks? You understand the question? Do you have 24 hours when you put the khuf on? Or do you have 24 hours when your wudu breaks? So for example, it's 7-11 now, right? They don't have 7-Elevens anymore. That was like a franchise, isn't it so? 7-Elevens. But now they just call it a 7-Eleven, but it's not actually 7-Eleven. You know, because they don't have the 2 rand games there, that the gambling games. Hey, there's those callous out of playing that game. It's gambling. Isn't it so? Oh, my. So, what was I saying? So it's 7-Eleven now, right? So if I put on my khuf now, does that mean at 7-Eleven tomorrow morning, and let's say I stay awake from now till tomorrow morning, and I make all my salahs with the same wudu, and it comes 7-Eleven tomorrow, must I take my khuf off? Must I just wash my feet? What must I do? This is a class, you know that. Oh, you thought it's a talk. No, this is the morning class. Yes, Adam. So the 24 hours will start when one's wudu breaks, right? The 24 hours will start when one's wudu breaks. Right, so whenever your wudu breaks, you put the khuf on now at 7:12. Your wudu breaks at dhuhr time. You have until the next 24 hours, right? So from that dhuhr, if dhuhr is 1 o'clock, breaks there 1 o'clock, you have till tomorrow 1 o'clock, right? At tomorrow 1 o'clock, you have to take the khuf off. And if you had wudu, right, then you take the khuf off and wash your feet. If you don't have wudu, then you must take complete wudu. Is that understood? So, in summary, the person who's a resident and they're not on travel, they can wear the khuf for 24 hours. The 24 hours will start from the time when you break your wudu, right? And you do the first, not even when you do the first wiping. I will just keep it at that. From the time when you break the wudu, right? Now, you make masah. You have wudu, 24 hours has elapsed. What do? You remove the khufs and you wash the feet, right? If you don't have wudu, you still have to remove the khufs, but you have to take a complete wudu. Understood? Okay. فإن مسح حضرا ثم سافر أو عكس لم يستوفي مدة السفر. If the person washes whilst they are a traveler, right? And they within this, they wash whilst they travel. Now they have 3 days, but they still, let's say they're in the second day, and they come home, right, before the 3 days elapse. Do they still have 1 day left from the travel, or do they have to consider that now they are a resident and they were already wearing the hoof for 2 days, so therefore they have to remove the hoof? And similarly, if a person is a resident, right, and they wear the hoof for close to 24 hours, and now whilst they're in this first 24 hours, they travel, right? Can they continue with the hoof for another 2 days, or do they have to take it off and start a separate 3 days? You understand the two? Do you understand the two pictures? So the summary to all of this is, in the first case and in the second case, the person will only have 24 hours. In the first case and the second case, the person will only have 24 hours. What does this mean? This means that if I am a resident, right, and I travel with that hoof that I started with as a resident, I can only complete 24 hours. If I am a traveler and I become a resident before my 3 days or 72 hours on that hoof elapses, when I become a resident, if I have the hoof on for less than 24 hours, I can complete only 24 hours. If I have the hoof on for more than 24 hours, then I have to take it off and wash the feet. Is that understood? Ah. وشرطه أن يلبس بعد كمال طهر. And a precondition for the validity of wiping over the hoof is to have to put the hoof on whilst you're in a complete state of purity. What does this mean? That a complete state of purity here means that you don't require a ritual bath, you don't require a ghusl, and you have wudu when you put the hoof on. Right? So if when you put the hoof on, you needed to take a ghusl, you cannot wipe on the hoof. You have to take it off, take a ghusl, then put the hoof on. If when you put the hoof on, you didn't have wudu, you cannot wipe on the hoof. You have to take the hoof off, make a complete wudu, put the hoof on, and then wipe on it. Is that understood? Okay. ساتر محل فرضه. In terms of the extent of the hoof, it must cover all the fard parts of the feet. Meaning, the feet up to and including the ankle. Up to including the ankle. Right? And for practical purposes, I will say up to including over the ankle. Right? More than the ankle. Because if even a part of the ankle becomes exposed, or part of the foot becomes exposed, you have to take the hoof off. Right? And wash the feet, put the hoof off from overs, covering every far part of the feet. Tahiran. In order to wipe on the hoof itself must not have any najis on. The hoof itself must not have any najis on. What if there is najis on the hoofs? Simply remove the najasa, right? But at the time when you're wiping, there mustn't be najasa. Understand? يمكن تباع المشي فيه لتردد مسافر لحاجاته قيل وحلالا. Right? So there are some interesting we leave that. So now this comes to the okay. Now how do you wipe the hoof? You wipe the hoof by if I wet this finger and I touch the hoof like this, that's sufficient. Right? That's the minimal. That's the minimal. What's the optimal? That for the person to wipe the hoof like this. Right? To wipe the hoof like this. So this is my right hand on top, left under, and I'm wiping in the opposite direction. That's the optimal of wiping the hoof. Right? Can a person wipe at the bottom only? No. If you want to suffice with a wipe that is lesser than that, right? Lesser than this demonstration. Can a person solely wipe the bottom of the hoof? No. You must, if you put your foot on the ground, anywhere else on the far section, right? You can wipe the hoof. Why am I pulling the mic?
No, you want to show them at home as well?
At home?
Because this guy's on there to show
No,
them.
it's much for them at home.
They can't see your foot more than that.
Hmm?
Otherwise, you must lift it high.
So what must I do? They can see under my dress. Okay. I don't know, eh?
That's fine.
Is it fine? Inshallah, you can watch other YouTube videos at home, inshallah. There's a lot on the internet. You have it. The live class have its benefits. You know, this is the what they say. This is the benefits of subscription. This is a subscription. They have the trial version at home. All the reward them. Yeah, they have subscribed. There's extra benefits. You know, now it's not anymore subscribe. It's join. Right? You must click join. Even the subscribers don't have so many benefits. So yeah, they click join. Right? So if the foot is on the ground like this, you can wipe anywhere within the far part, right, of the hoof. Meaning that this is the far part, you can wipe anywhere there. Can you wipe under solely? Right? And on the side they require the left foot, right? So if you can wipe anywhere, right? Anyway, but under alone, no, you cannot. The wiping of underneath the hoof only suffices when it's coupled with wiping the top. Is that understood? Not complicated? So, if you now have a wudu, right? Then you take the hoof off. Let's say you take the hoof off before 24 hours and you have wudu, you simply have to wash your feet. You simply have to wash your feet because you have wudu, but now your wudu is incomplete. Right? Because this is a dispensation for the completion of wudu in terms of washing. Right? So if you have wudu, you take your hoof off, you simply have to wash your feet. And this is a proof for another discussion that we had. Right? The brother Ibrahim was saying that an extraneous example in terms of washing the one limb before the next, he said that if I wash one limb now, or I wash all my limbs and I leave the feet and I wash it 3 hours later, will my wudu still be valid? Whilst I still have the intention for wudu in all of this time, meaning I didn't lose consciousness, will my wudu still be valid? It will be valid. Over here, you have a wudu, right? 24 hours you keep this wudu, and you only wash your feet 24 hours later. But your wudu is still valid. The wudu is still valid. So they call it a nadir. Like it's almost like a parallel case to tell us like the line of reasoning is the same. So the line of reasoning that we used over there, we see a similar line of reasoning. Okay, it's not like an advanced fiqh class. So we leave it at that, right? So if you have the wudu and you take the hoof off, you simply wash the feet. If you don't have the wudu and your time is up, and then you just take a normal wudu, we suffice for that, inshallah. I'm going to open for some questions on the hoof for a few minutes, and then we can continue to discuss. I will at least want to give the broad outlines of what breaks the wudu. Perhaps just giving an indication to it with a little bit of explanation will suffice for the purpose of understanding what breaks the wudu, so that by tomorrow's class we might enter into the discussions regarding the salah, inshallah al-fatah. So questions on the hoof? Yes. Anyone else? The sock. Is that like a question? The sock as a hoof. Hmm. Yeah. Depends on the sock. So the sock as a hoof, um, I don't know how contentious an issue it is. Um, Generally, like I'm not a jurist in any sense of the word. Um, in fact, like this whole process is really out of my forte in terms of my involvement with the Sharia. Um, However, Alhamdulillah, we know what we're talking about. Um, but there are some issues like in terms of like amongst the clergy. Um, you see, there's a difference between like what we know in theory and like what's our social practice. But I'm going to say that wiping on the sock, in terms of my understanding, would be valid, right? However, we still have to ask ourselves what is the kind of sock, right? So let us revisit the text. Let us revisit the text, and the text says, يمكن تباع المشي فيه لتردد مسافر لحاجاته. So one of the qualities of the khuf is that in other books they mentioned as it must have a quality of quwwah. The khuf must be strong, right? The scholars also go on to discuss that what exactly is the khuf. They speak about the jawrab, right? So some scholars say when we speak about the khuf in latter fiqhi terminology, then we're actually referring to what they call the jawrab, right? And in terms of contemporary Arabic, the jawrab will be translated as the sock, right? So they say the jawrabu sufiya, the sock of the Sufis, right? So the leather khuf is like the most classically like understood khuf. However, the scholars have never understood the khuf to be restricted to the leather sock. In terms of my reading, uh, like the scholars, I mean, from Imam Shafi'i, which you're looking at, like Imam Shafi'i passes away when the year what 205. He passed away the year 205. Jurists after Imam Shafi'i, scholars the likes of Imam Abu Hanifa, who passes away the year what 150, right after Hijrah. So as early as this, the scholars are discussing the khuf not merely as a leather sock, but they're discussing the specifications of what can be called a khuf. The leather sock is merely the most almost like common understanding that we have of the khuf. But there are other type of socks, right? Or let us say there are other types of foot gear that uh, that share in terms of their understanding as being a khuf, which will be valid to wipe on. So the khuf has to be strong. What do they mean by strong? They mean that the traveler will be able to walk on it, right? Most of the scholars will mention for 24 hours they will be able to walk on it for their needs. Now, in explaining this, the scholars say that on normal grounds, and in our terms, it will be like uh, uh, an at least fairly paved way. So, not like a rocky hiking trail, right? That's extraneous grounds. So, if the hoof had to break on that, it wouldn't be considered as not strong for the purposes of wiping, right? Um, so it's strong in the sense that the person who's traveling, in terms of the usage for 24 hours to facilitate the needs of travel, they would be able to on those hoofs, they would be able to walk, right? So it doesn't mean that you're walking for 24 hours straight. It means that in the normative movements of a traveler, they would be able to use that foot gear without it breaking, right? After 24 hours. And if you have any experience in travel, that is a very light specification. If you have any experience in travel, that's a very light specification. Any tablighis in the house? I'm ready. So I had this idea, if you will allow me, I had this idea of like the Jamaat brothers who are always traveling, to give them some homework. And what is the homework? If we across, let us say, let's call it 10 Jamaats, or let's call it 10 guys across some Jamaats. We give them a range of socks on their travels to, let's say they're traveling to PE, right? A distance like we in the Jamaat, I'm a Jamaat guy, you know. So a distance that we in the Jamaat would normally travel is we go to PE, right? Which is a journey of a few hours and so forth, right? So but we tend to stretch it out because we stop, we go to the shop and all of that. So were we to give a few guys a range of socks and see how it would last, then I think we will understand what the fiqh is trying to tell us. I think the difficulty around answering the question of the sock is that normatively we don't walk on the socks. But in terms of what the fiqh is telling us, I believe most quality socks to be permissible to wipe on. But that's just me. Do forgive me if I answer the question in theory, but even locally, I understand it to be like contending understandings amongst I wouldn't really say my teachers, but I'm like scholars in general. So yeah, so I would say like show me the sock, and then I'll tell you. Because if no, I don't think any of you are confident in your socks after the explanation that I'm giving you, because that's the only thing that I can provide you. I can't endorse a sock company or the like, right? But we can provide you with a framework. However, I think most people are generally uncomfortable in trusting their judgment of their sock. So show me the sock and I'll tell you, inshallah. And I think that's a good practice. Like you go to your local scholar and ask him regarding your sock, and he will tell you. Because now they do make like hoof socks that, and I think the other question is the question of waterproofing. The other question is the question of waterproofing, right? In terms of the Shafi'i school, the official opinion like this of the madhab would be like water mustn't be able to seep through. But there is an alternatively strong opinion, so it comes here fil asah. So if you understand anything about the madhab, then fil asah means like the alternative opinion regarding the water seeping through, meaning that it doesn't have to be waterproof. It's still a strong opinion. It's still a strong opinion. Therefore, when we look at the normal sock, we do see permissibility in wiping over the sock. But will every sock necessarily meet those criteria? No, won't necessarily meet those criteria. Allah knows best. Allah knows best. That's in terms of the Shafi'i school of thought.
Well, if you take a look, in the morning you put on a pair of socks,
and
you put on like an example of boot, right? And the boot covers to your ankle. And maybe if some people they sometimes will wipe over the shoe, it must over the shoe. Is that permissible? Hypothetically saying that you will make salah with the shoes on when you find yourself. Is that permissible?
So does the so you get a certain type of boot. It goes up like the boot would go above the ankle, and you stitch it. I mean, you tie it close. My understanding would be that this boot would be like it will suffice. in terms of the like they even speak about what if the thing that you're wearing is made of iron. They speak about what if the thing that you're wearing is made of glass, right? And this is like a classical example. It comes in all the books if you read regarding this issue. Okay, I can't say all the books. I haven't read all the books. It comes in many books. Okay, it comes in a few books in the madhab, right? That this example of the glass, right? And I think they bring it as an extremist example, really to show us that number one, the khuf can be see-through, but number two, the possibility of walking in the khuf it has nothing to do with practicality. So they will speak about if it's made of iron, yes. If it's made of glass, yes. If it's made of wood, yes. So in terms of that, if it's made of these boots that you're speaking about, is probably made of a stronger leather than the khuf. So it would be. But then you have other factors besides that in terms of walking. Yes, they speak about this mas'alatul jurmuq, right? So the jurmuq. The problem is if you have something that could be considered a khuf, but it doesn't quite meet the requirements, and you put the khuf over that, because normatively this is how we wear the khuf. We put the sock under, and so I won't answer this question. So you can wipe over that khuf. Make mask over the shoe. Yeah. So is that understood?
We're saying you can.
Yes, we are.
But then you must make sure now of that boot or shoe.
Yes. But then there's a discussion in Salah also, which is not too technical. But I mean, in principle, you would have to make Salah with that shoe on, and they do it. I've seen it in practice. I've seen it in Aqsa. The guards over there, they can't take off their shoe every time they want to take wudu. So I've seen many of the guys come there into the wudu khana, and in the courtyard they have the right wing and left wing toilets. If you go, I mean, I've seen it. You go there, and the guys they come, they take wudu, and you see them wiping over their boots. And I mean, those boots they're very high boots, they're strong boots. So then you will see them also making salah in those boots. You'll see them making salah in those boots as well. So it's not a baseless practice in the least. Allah knows best. Yes, I know. Okay. So I hope that answers the question. I also apologize regarding the sock. Perhaps it is that some of you are still in, but I think you understand the general idea around the sock. Is there a niyyah if you wear the khuf? No. There's no added niyyah or anything of the like, right? No niyyahs, no du'as reported, nothing. Just put your khuf on and go. And then even in terms of, for interest sake, in terms of the discussion, like Imam al-Haramain, he mentions when it comes to the khuf, so they bite this issue out of the waterproofness. He says that al-ghuslu ma kana ma'muran bihi. This is, you were never required to wash the khuf in the first place. The khuf is a dispensation from washing. So why would we require the khuf to be washable if the dispensation of the khuf is to get you not to wash? The khuf must be wiped. So if you want to put a precondition regarding the like the waterproofness, I don't know what you call that, the permeability. If you want to put a precondition regarding the permeability of the sock or of the hoof, then you should judge it in relation to wiping, not in relation to washing, because you were never required to wash the hoof in the first place. The hoof is the dispensation for the washing, and I thought this to be quite a sound and strong line of reasoning. Not that I'm any judge of juristic reasoning, but it appealed to me in terms of my coming across it. So I think we leave it at that. I would like to just read the so that we did like cover something new. I'll just read a few, 1, 2, 3 short paragraphs each. The longest paragraph has 4 lines, inshallah, just to like paint a picture around what breaks the wudu. Then you mull over it, and tomorrow hopefully we can complete that and get into salah, inshallah al-fatah. So he says, I think it starts on the side. The emission of anything from the 2 waste passages, right? The 2 waste passages, I think that is clear. Front or back nullifies the wudu. Note the word anything. Wudu is also lost upon losing control of one's intellect, right? During sleep or otherwise. So losing control of one's intellect, like becoming unconscious in any which way. Unless one sleeps sitting down with one's seat firmly fixed on the ground. Here they say on the ground, but the scholars will mention that it would have been better to leave out on the ground. On commentaries on text, like all over, they say it would have been because you don't only sit on the ground, right? So it might give the person in the impression that they have to be on the ground. You could be on the bed, you could be in your car, you could be anywhere. Number 2, touching the private parts, front or back, of any human, whether oneself or someone else, and whether adult or child, with the palm of the hand or the inside of the fingers, nullifies wudu, even if it be one's own child or a dead person. Number 4, touching of the skin of an adult male. But so there's like another issue, like almost there is like in terms of discussion, there's a male bias in terms of example. There are some books that are written specifically around the females, and I find that's a challenge in reading fiqh, because the fiqh is normally like just written from the male perspective, and so it makes the female masail generally more difficult to research. I don't know what benefit that complaint is to you. I apologize. The touching of the skin of an adult male by an unrelated female and vice versa without any barrier nullifies the wudu. However, okay, I'm going to leave it at that. I intended not to discuss this point because I'm going to split hairs on it. So inshallah, that tells you that there are these 4 things. Number 1, whatever comes out of the 2 passages. Number 2, losing one's intellect, not necessarily being mad, but any form of unconsciousness, right? Touching the private parts, your own or someone else's, or touching the skin of the opposite gender that's not a mahram, right? So who is a mahram? All of that, inshallah, stay tuned. So whatever is besides this will not break the wudu. So whatever question you want to ask, before you ask the question, remember this is okay. Malna's going to scale me out later if I'm going to be hardcore with you. But this is a class. So before you ask the question, at least run it in your mind. Does it form part of these 4 categories? If it doesn't, it most probably doesn't break your wudu. But maybe you're not sure, then you can ask, right? So najasa, all of that. Like the uncle asked, mashallah, fortunately you asked before this explanation came, like if the person is in the toilet, Now they come out, their feet is wet, and they tramp in najasa. Do they have to take wudu again according to this standard? No. Does that mean they can make salah with the najasa? No, that's a separate question. Does it mean they don't have to remove it? Separate question. But in terms of breaking the wudu, there are only these four categories of causes, right? So inshallah, what we'll do is tomorrow I'll mention the point. Any questions on this point? Move on. Any questions on this point? Move on. And then we go on to salah, inshallah al-fatah. Because we open questions for the khuf. So can we then suffice for that? Inshallah al-fatah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala facilitate understanding and practice and ease, inshallah, in the deen within the limits of the sharia. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. Subhanallah bihamdi, subhanakallahumma bihamdika, nashhadu an la ilaha illa ant, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Same.